Wai is, in my opinion, an amazing thinker, speaker, a writer of books, and is working on an artificial intelligence startup. And I, to relax the other night, watched the video again, and just out of the blue thought I'd contact you because I had a bit more cred then to say, like, actually I've helped start a movement now. So, and some of the things in the video about what makes a movement successful are part of our movement. So I thought that was really interesting, and it turns out that there's quite a bit of new information around. We haven't got a very detailed plan, and so it was just going to be us meeting in the pub, and then we invited a few people, and then I thought we should video it. So it's not like to just take the pressure off Wai. It's we're just going to have a chat, and then decide afterwards if we keep in the video. You know, that'll be your shout. And so it's a chat, right? And so I'm going to ask some questions, and then I'll open it up. We'll just see how we get on. I think we'll be about an hour or so, something like that.
Okay, great. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So
maybe a bit longer. I mean, so
yeah,
it's riveting material. I mean, I'm warning. Okay.
Okay. So I'm diving straight into a very particular piece. So part of the theory that Wai puts forwards is that revolutionary movements have esoteric religion behind them and apocalyptic messaging. So, and I was interested to know more about why the esoteric religion piece might be of use to a movement, and obviously doesn't mean that everybody's got to be into it. Wai came up with a theory called fractal brain theory that was launched around 2012 with a book. And I wanted to know, first of all, to ask you to give a summary of that theory. So we're diving straight into something relatively technical, but a kind of summary of that first, because it's a sort of context, and then I'll ask another question. So,
okay.
Is that good?
So a bit of background in my life, basically. I started out wanting to create artificial intelligence about 35 years ago now. And went to university, did my studies, got interested in the brain, but then I went renegade, so I went on this kind of journey into the kind of like dark side of London, I suppose, psychedelia, squats, counterculture, kind of whole different side of the world. And I had mystical experiences through various ways, and then the work on the AI continued, and then I kind of like investigated this kind of mystical dimension, and I started giving public talks about it 20 years ago. But anyway, okay, so basically most of my time has gone investigating this fractal brain theory. I really wanted to understand the brain, so all through, started from my late teens, just studying loads and loads of neuroscience. Then I discovered there's this way of looking at the brain using this concept called symmetry, which is the most fundamental idea in science. So using this concept called symmetry, basically is this notion that there's a pattern, and that same pattern can explain lots of different patterns. So the idea of symmetry is basically invariant form behind lots of different seeming forms. So what I discovered was a kind of like a pattern behind the organisation of the brain. When we talk about fractals, it means recursively nested symmetry. So smaller copies are like the big copy, like Russian dolls. So then I realised neurons work like the entire brain, work like intermediate stages of the brain. And I kind of fleshed this out with lots and lots of detail over the years. And these were talks I presented in 2012. Now, where I've taken it much, much further now, in the past 6-7 years, okay, is that I've extended it much further. The basic symmetry which I've used to decompose the brain and mind, I've used to decompose the genome. So this is where a lot of the work in the past 7 years has gone. Okay, this is a revolution in science. Okay, so basically there's a symmetry between a gene and a brain. So through lots of detail, you can explain basically a neuron is invariant with a gene. Now it's not obvious, but it's according to how real neurons work and real gene regulatory networks, how they work, you can show there's a perfect symmetry between a gene and a neuron. And you can go on to show that gene regulatory networks and neuronal networks are not metaphorically like one another, they are symmetrically identical. And onto the brain and genome, and onto what does a genome do? A genome computes a body, ontogenesis. There's also a symmetry between what a genome computes and what does brain compute? Fortin behaviour. There's symmetry between ontogenesis and Fortin behaviour. And it goes on, it goes on. How does the genome change? It changes through evolution. There's also a symmetry between evolution and learning and creativity. It means that there is a perfect symmetry between life as we understand it and intelligence as we understand it. So that's where the theory has gone. Now, so why isn't this guy promoting his scientific theories in the mainstream? Well, because it's pointless. Because as you know, science is very conservative in, say, the life sciences. Biological science and evolutionary theory is the domain of the old upstarts. You have these people, Caltech professors and E.O. Wilson, you know, Richard Dawkins' hero. People like James Shapiro are kind of giants of biological science, but they have difficulty presenting quite simple ideas that are innovative. So what chance do I have? Okay, so the strategy, okay, has been that I've continued work on the AI. Now, what I've managed to do, the same symmetry which I can use to unify life and intelligence, genomes and brains, that same symmetry extends to artificial intelligence. So the paradigms of machine learning, the paradigms of artificial intelligence, indeed other technologies like data compression and also relational databases and search engines, there's actually a unified symmetry behind all these things. So the strategy basically is to go, like at the end of the Revolutions video, I talk about this thing called the sword and the stone, the mythic archetype of the sword and the stone. If you can pull out the sword and the stone, you have a platform to basically talk about political things, religious things, the entire worldview. So basically this goal of creating artificial intelligence, I've progressed much, much further in the past 7 years. So this symmetry has allowed me now to explain a unified theory of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And that really is the key to pushing these ideas through. At least there's something far... So I'm giving a bit of a monologue here, aren't I? This leads to something... this kind of merges with a kind of wider message. Because even not considering my work, okay, there's something very exciting happening in science. Very, very exciting. And as a scientist, you totally get it. People think there is this division between science and spirituality. That's the narrative. But in reality, science came from the mystical, came from the esotericists. Even your recent quantum physicists like Erwin Schrödinger, in his book, What is Life, actually quotes the Bhagavadgita, Atman equals Brahman, soul of a person equals God. In his book, What is Life, he actually quotes in Latin, Deus factus sum, I have become God, to sum up the beliefs of the mystics, basically saying this is what I believe. Okay, this is a universal pattern between the originators of science, way back from Bacon to the quantum physicists and to the present, some of them. What's happened is basically science started from the mystical. This is staggering. It's converging right back to it. I'm not talking a little bit of convergence, a little bit of metaphor, a little bit of analogy. There is a perfect correspondence now. Things have happened in the past 10, 20 years. Discoveries and hypotheses have been advanced. These fragments each have parallels to the picture of the universe presented by the hidden esoteric religion. In the past 10, 20 years, these pieces come together into a composite picture that is identical to the ancient mysteries. So, Upanishads, the Hindu texts, as is the human body, so is the cosmic body. As is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the atom, so is the universe. So the notion of a fractal universe, which is accepted now, basically, as is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. The idea that a universe becomes a huge organism, cosmic Christ, celestial Buddha, etc. The notion of Asimov's universe, Schrödinger's wave equations extrapolated to the universe, the Witt equation. So these fragments each have a kind of tiny little parallel with the mystical. But when you put these pieces together, you have a composite picture, which is the complete return of the esoteric religion for the 21st century.
Amazing. So I'm in a real nerd off couple of days. Thank you for that introduction. If your mind's not blown already, it will be. I'm having a great couple of nerd off days. So I got to be with Ian McGilchrist yesterday, who has written a book called The Master and His Emissary about the human brain. And I think his essential thesis is that the left hemisphere looks at detail and the right looks at the big picture. And the left brain under capitalism, I guess, is just taken over, and we're not doing the big picture sort of spiritual holding piece. Hopefully I'm saying this work well enough. But one of the things, now Ian McGilchrist was, I think, an Oxford Don. So I'm just saying this because I think it will honour you. In an Oxford Don for literature, went back into become a medic, and then went on to become a brain scientist, right? And one of the things he says is that consciousness is a basis of the universe. It's not an emergent property from matter. So I just wonder. So this is not. So Wai is not some like out there person who's just saying this kind of thing. Like there are other scientists. Then you've got people like Rupert Sheldrake, again an out there person, but talking about morphic resonance and things like that in the universe. My ex-husband's particle physicist, and when you talk about teleology, which is the idea that there's inherent purpose in the universe, there's a part of particle physics theory called pilot wave theory, where there's a wave that leads the particles. So it's in the science, is what I'm trying to say. It's not an established theory, but it's not also totally outrageous. So my science was crystallography partly and molecular dynamics modelling, but one of the things we absolutely knew in crystallography was this weird thing where you would try and crystallise a protein, and everybody would be trying across the world to get this protein that had just been extracted into a crystal, and you fire x-rays at it and you couldn't get its structure. Nobody's getting the crystal, trying all these things. Suddenly, one lab gets a crystal and all labs can get a crystal, right? So a known phenomena in morphic resonance. There's other bits of biology so there's weird shit going off that we don't know. And what's interesting to me is whether the inherent purpose of the universe affects, and the fact that esoteric religions are behind revolutionary movements, like how we've been working with that as Extinction Rebellion. And so moving on, but I just kind of wanted to say there's a reason why this connects into what we're doing, but I wondered if you had more to say, Hon, about consciousness, because that's what's one of the, I'd sent Wai some questions, and when I'd sort of sat with this fractal brain theory, I'd kind of got the, with the symmetries of symmetries, got the kind of overall message of it, but I was like, where does the consciousness emerge from? Tell me about consciousness.
Well, one important point I should point out when you talk about this kind of teleology, universe having a purpose, new stuff's come out in the past 5-10 years. An old idea called time-symmetric quantum mechanics. So Schrödinger's wave equations normally go forwards in time, and there's something called time-symmetric quantum mechanics where you go to the future and basically the waves go backwards in time. Now this has become current in the past 5-10 years. So even mainstream thinkers and respected thinkers like Paul Davies are talking about a destiny wave function. A destiny wave function from the future, basically shaping the future shaping the universe towards a destiny. That's teleology. And from superstring theory and loop quantum gravity, which are two main contenders for the unification theory of gravity and quantum mechanics. But from both these schools of thought, they see now the Big Bang as the Big Bounce. Okay, so basically there was an epoch before the Big Bang. Now through the complex mathematical deliberations, they've decided that this previous Big Bang era, basically, it's a mirror image of this universe. Now, this thing called CPT symmetry in physics. When you have basically a mirror image, you have time inversion, which means we think we're going forwards in time, okay, but we're not. We're bouncing back to the origin. Again, teleology. So these are very powerful strands which return the idea of providence, prophecy, destiny. So this is a very powerful way of looking at the universe. And this is mainstream science. So again, that's another piece of the jigsaw puzzle to slot into this new 21st century revision of the nature of science. Now, consciousness, okay, so basically the big puzzle of consciousness, okay, basically the answer's always been there. You're talking, Gil Price talking about consciousness being primary, basically. Well, it's called idealism, okay, that existence is consciousness. Idealism is what was believed by the greatest thinkers on this planet, including Einstein. All the German philosophers and great thinkers and quantum physicists were idealists. Okay, basically it says that consciousness is real and physical reality is illusory. Okay, the problem with idealism is how do you account for physical reality? Another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that's returned in the past 5 years. Max Tegmark, MIT physicist, has basically resurrected the thought of Pythagoras, uber mystic, the guy who brought the mysteries from ancient Egypt to Greece, sort of the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. Basically, he said the universe is a number, And Max Tegmark has returned this idea that the universe doesn't actually exist, it exists as a mathematical object. So basically, like the Mandelbrot set, okay, this finite equation that describes infinite complexity, infinite intricate beauty, never repeating, a fractal object. The idea is basically that this logos, this object that describes not just this physical universe, but all possible universes, is basically that is the nature of objective reality. And what happens with this object is basically you render first-person subjective experience. Okay, so the basic idea is then how do you explain consciousness using these ideas? And the beautiful thing is that basically there is an explanation for consciousness. That's the complete return of truths contained even in the Bible, Bhagavadgita and Quran. It is the idea that somehow we are all one. In Christ there's no Jew, there's no Greek, there's no slave. In the Quran, that we're all created from one soul. And then Luqman, the Sura, says that your creation and your resurrection is but that of a single self, not otherwise. Explicitly stated. Bhagavad Gita, the super soul, God inside you, appears divided, but is never divided. Somehow God is one. The basic message of monotheistic religion, Quran, Judaism, the Bible. The Shema, the greatest commandment in Judaism, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. So somehow God is one. God is inside you, the Christ within, Krishna within, Allah close to in jugular vein. God is inside you, God is one, we are one. Somehow the oneness that God is and the oneness that we are is one and the same. So this is really the hardest thing to explain. But this is the ultimate convergence between the esoteric religion, which Quran, Bible, Bhagavad Gita alludes to in certain passages, with science. So the explanation is so simple, it's so succinct. Basically, it's simply an explanation of all existence and consciousness based on the only thing you can ever have certainty of, one consciousness. Okay, so then what is the proof? The proof is experience of being the total consciousness, or the universal consciousness, or God. And really, in terms of revolutionary movements, this has been at the heart of revolutionary movements from China, all revolutions in Islam onwards. I mean, controversially, I can even say the roots of the Nazi Party and Marxism via Hegel. So it's a very, very universal idea. All these revolutionary movements have this thing in common. If you can actually resurrect this idea explicitly and say it out loud, clearly, for the 21st century, you start, the mythic archetype is the prophetic archetype. There's this great scene in Dune where the Bene Gesserit witch says, if you can yoke politics to religion, then reap the whirlwind. Isn't that what you need to really disrupt and cause a kind of change in the current trajectory, which is leading to extinction? Mm-hmm. So yeah, consciousness basically. I was sponsored to go to this Tucson Consciousness Conference a few years back, and basically they're all materialists. They're trying to reduce consciousness to physical reality that doesn't really exist. So simply, materialism is basically an assumption. Okay, it's only an assumption. The idea of a physical world out there, separate from my consciousness. That's the assumption, and it's mainly a kind of Anglo-Saxon assumption, basically in the continent. Mm-hmm. It's idealism, it's phenomenology, it's existentialism. Somehow consciousness, subjective reality is first. All we're doing basically was kind of restoring the balance. Yes, there seems to be a physical world out there, but say we must return the idea of consciousness being really fundamental in purely scientific mathematic terms, reasonable terms. And from that you can, you can form a new worldview and totally reinterpret world history.
Can I tell you a story? I'm not going to be able to talk like that. Awesome, isn't it? Tell you a story though from the iboga psychedelic trip. I took a flood dose of iboga in Costa Rica, and I took a taster session dose beforehand, which was full on as well. Okay. I have to say, but nothing like the other one. There's another story. But one of the things that happened in that in that taster session was that I suddenly started to see a pulsating geometry that was creating new bits of universe, and I was actually feeling a lot of despair. I was emotionally in a really poor state, and I was thinking that could be interesting if I didn't feel really shit right now. But there's this pulsating geometry and all that. It's very clear that this thing exists somewhere and it creates new bits of universe, and I'm like, whatever really, I'm not particularly interested right now. A few months later, I'm having hanging out with my first husband, Jeff, and he's telling me that he's finishing off his book, Universal, that he's written with Professor Brian Cox.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know, so physics has been in my life for a long time. Around the kitchen table, so the Large Hadron Collider, when that came online and all that. So that's all been sort of part of my journey, hearing the physics emerging. So a few years ago, physicists used to talk about the theory of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And I always thought it's fucking arrogant that physicists would talk about when they're not really talking about economics and society and all the stuff that's really painful and the sort of emergent strategies, emergent properties of even chemistry is tricky for some physicists, but you know, emergent properties in nature and ecology and so on. So I always thought it was a bit of a dodgy term. But Jeff said it's become a joke in physics that they now talk about the theory of anything rather than the theory of everything, because what they've got to, I mean, they used to say in physics, give us one free miracle and we'll explain anything. This is this big bang. Yeah. But actually, so they know now, if they've got the conditions just immediately after the Big Bang, we're talking about tiny fractions of a second, and you plug in the current laws of physics, it's on the YouTube, you run this Eagle simulation, Eagle project, and it simulates the known universe from this information. Astonishing that physics is that clever. But the thing he said was, the only problem is, Gail, you know, there could be another point here with a different set of conditions, different laws of physics, different starting conditions, different universe, and here's another one, and then he starts doing this with his hands. It's basically, Gail, it's like there's this, the maths of it's called the Calabi-Yau, and it's this geometry and it creates new bits of universe, right? So how the fuck does that work? That somehow, with the psychedelic medicine, I mean, maybe I knew it already, we can, you know, argue coincidence, but I don't, you know, there's a moment when I feel like a bit of information from the universe about something that I don't know about, that's then confirmed to me by Britain's special physicist, you know, when he was. But so awesome, but yeah.
Well, totally. I mean, you did give me some questions to help me prepare, and one of the things is how do you what words you use a kind of a concrete physical explanation of communication with this universal consciousness.
Yeah.
Do you know, my personal journey, I've had really, like yourself, I mean, all kinds of psychedelic experiences. You see things, you see narratives, you see things, okay, these God trips where you spend your rest of your life trying to explain it. It changes your life, and basically you see specific things, you see specific like storylines, you see, you know, like ideas, and you think these ideas are coming from a higher source. Now, what is the mechanism behind it? You asked. Well, in a sense, you can explain why should a universal consciousness have a dialogue with an individual? How can this universal consciousness communicate this tiny speck? Well, one, there is an explanation for why everyone is God and how we're all one consciousness, undivided, indivisible. There is an explanation for that. But another easy way of explaining it, if there is a destiny wave function, okay, emanating from the future, the simple explanation is that in certain states of mind, the collapse of the wave function, okay, God does play dice. That's what quantum mechanics is about. It's a probabilistic aspect. But in certain conditions, the dice are loaded. So basically, the collapse of the wave function happens in such a way in your brain that you receive transmission from the future through this destiny wave function. Now, that's not, I can't prove it, that's metaphysical speculation. But that's not any more metaphysical speculation than most of the current scientific theories now. Parallel universes, the notion that the number of universes there are, types of universe, is 10 to the power of 500. That's a beyond astronomical number, 10 to the power of 500. And they all exist somehow, types of universe. There was a conference last year about where scientists were asking whether we're still doing science, okay, because they're not producing testable hypotheses anymore. So it's become an arena of metaphysical speculation. So what I'm saying, it's up for grabs to present a coherent picture that's more universal and more compelling than the picture presented by the scientists now, and it's not on a lesser level than the speculations that are current. by taking the ideas of people like Max Tegmark resurrecting these ancient ideas of microcosms, macrocosm, time-symmetric quantum mechanics, you can present a very compelling picture to generally not the older established scientists, but the younger scientists, the up-and-coming generation, to really usurp the existing materialist, reductionist kind of paradigm, which I think McGilchrist is objecting to. So there is a revolution in happening in science, but it needs to be pushed along. So there needs to be a kind of like an active force behind it. And what's at stake is basically there's a wider kind of goal. We're not just trying to change the paradigms of science. Okay. In the world, all these political commentators talk about three missing things. There's a missing social movement. All your left wingers saying this is, Marxism, socialism's dead. Where is this revolutionary movement that's going to change the world? Where is it? No one knows what it is. No one knows where it's going to come from. Okay. There's also this missing worldview. Okay, so all your right-wing thinkers, left-wing thinkers, even neoliberals, acknowledge that basically the existing worldviews of European society, of Marxism, whatever, they've all passed their sell-by dates. But there's this kind of missing narrative. All your great thinkers, like not so great. all your mainstream thinkers who get the headlines, like Zizek and Peterson. You're kind of like all your Noah Yuval Harari. This missing kind of grand narrative, this alternative vision. What is it? We need the paradigm shift. Yeah, there's going to be a paradigm shift, but no one's been able to define it. Okay, we're not talking about a single paradigm. We're talking about the master paradigm of all paradigms. Now, let me introduce an idea of why this idea is so important. Okay, because political philosophy, political programs are rooted in worldview. So people think, okay, we're going to start a revolution. Okay, we've got a manifesto. Okay, what else do we need? We've got a manifesto, we've got enthusiasm, a couple of charismatic figures, we've got some media attention, or we've got a constitution. Okay, we've got a political program. Okay, we've got a list of demands. What's missing is basically there's a glue behind it, and that's worldview. Now, from the right wing and the left wing, okay, this is controversial stuff. This is very controversial. Someone who knew a lot about revolutionary movements and about political power, okay, went on and on about it. In his speeches, in his personal interactions, in his book, okay, he went on and on about it. This guy he led a revolutionary movement that almost took over the world, okay, and he constantly banged on about the importance of worldview and that the need to have a worldview and a political program based on that worldview. And the word he used was Weltanschauung. Okay, it means worldview. It's basically Adolf Hitler. Okay, so the importance of worldview, and it's not just your right wing; it's your left wing. Zizek. Okay, what's missing? Marxist thinks as a Hegelian, thinks as an atheist Hegelian. He got told that atheists thought he was a god. Bit of a contradiction there. But even he says, quoting his Marxist pal Frederick Jameson, there's a missing cognitive mapping. If we only had that cognitive mapping to describe the situation in the world today, the situation of the past, the future, how do we get to a better future? If you had that cognitive mapping, then that's the answer. So basically, what I'm saying is that new worldview has to come from, or has to be reconciled with science. It's not going to be worldview based on the Quran or the Bible or neoliberalism. It has to be a kind of comprehensive worldview that is completely scientific. And that worldview can interface with the esoteric religion and actually correspond to the core truths of the Quran, Bible, and Bhagavadgita, then that's exactly what you need for this kind of this universalism that everyone knows that there's this universalism that's necessary to bring people together, to act together, planet-wide. But no one can define it. Some left-wing thinkers think, oh, it might be something to do with postmodernism. Yeah, everything's relative. That's where we get people to... But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you can define an absolute by going to the history of religion, the history of politics, the history of science, and show that there's a common truth, a common absolute behind all of them, then that is the basis of your new worldview. Another development of the since the revolutions talk was given, I learned basically the origins of the Renaissance, which gave rise to the Enlightenment, gave rise to ideas of political philosophy. But back then, I hadn't read books like the most influential political book of all time, Plato's Republic. There is a mystical dimension to it that all political scientists don't acknowledge it, or they ignore it, or they basically brush it aside. But the entire book doesn't make sense without it. Okay, this is a huge book. I mean, words like tyranny, democracy all come from this book. And it's prescient predictions of democracy will become tyranny. They'll vote a kind of strongman who gives people bread and circuses, and that's how the way of democracy. The core message of Republic is basically the idea of a philosopher king. Okay, king is a very kind of loaded term, but some kind of political leader. Okay, now the core idea is basically the philosopher king leaves the cave of illusions, leaves Plato's cave. That's a mystical allegory, has the mystical experience, experiences the good. But then he comes back into society to take society toward the good. There's no more succinct description of progressive politics than that. And you've got to realise this book was massively influential during the Renaissance. Another book, massively influential, Oration on the Dignity of Man, the manifesto of the Renaissance, the original manifesto of humanism, okay, by one of the geniuses of the Renaissance. You know the artistic geniuses, Leonardo, Michelangelo. The intellectual geniuses were Pico della Mirandola and Marsilio Ficino. They both believed in this esoteric religion. The Renaissance wasn't just a renaissance of kind of pagan books, it was a renaissance of pagan mystical religion. So one of the core ideas in Oration on the Dignity of Man is basically human dignity is based on the idea that, okay, one, we can choose between the kind of angelic and divine realms and the bestial lobster chimpanzee realms, okay? We can choose, okay? But more than that, he was saying, he actually quotes the Bible, Psalm 82:6, that ye are all gods, ye are all sons of the Most High. Okay, so where's he coming from? He's saying basically human dignity is not just rooted, like the Catholic Church, that we're made in the image of God. It's rooted in the idea that we are effectively God. Now Psalm 82:6, you've got to understand it in the Bible in the context of the Gospel of John, chapter 10:26, where his fellow Jews were about to stone him to death. You claim to be God. You know, why are you stoning to be deaf? Because you claim to be God. And in his defense, he quotes Psalm 82:6. Okay, so in that context, the message there is unequivocal. Basically, he's saying, yes, I am God, everyone is God. Okay, now back to Oration on Dignity of Man. Now, what we're saying basically, human dignity rests on this cosmological, metaphysical assumption that essentially we are divine. Okay, but he goes on to say that basically the idea of white magic or natural magic is this idea. He actually says basically magic is what's understood by the Zoroastrian high priests as what basically it is to govern the commonwealth of humankind according to the commonwealth of the universe. So somehow there's a transcendent image, you might call it the good or whatever, somehow we must manifest that transcendent image on the planet. Okay, same idea. And he calls the Magus. What is the Magus? The Magus unifies the heavenly with the earthly. And basically, then the Magus transforms society. So these ideas are not just, these are not fringe ideas. These ideas basically shaped the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Without the Rosicrucian movement, without Freemasonry, you wouldn't have the English Civil War, you wouldn't have the French-American revolutions. But if you can actually reawaken these ideas for the 21st century, that's a very, very historical narrative to present to especially people in Occident. You can do the same thing with Islam, you can do the same thing with India, you can do the same thing with China, throw in Marxism. Okay? So that's basically what we're talking about is a paradigm shift that doesn't just cover science, but does the entire shebang, the entire Weltanschauung, basically the entire, all paradigms of humankind, all knowledge as a single organic unity. You have to transform the entire thing, and that's the basis of a world social movement.
Right. If I've got that.
It's a bit of a speech. Again.
Pressure. So I just wanted to translate what you've just said in terms of what I see happening within Extinction Rebellion. But I have to say really, really, really strongly, it's just a view that I see. And it's not what anybody has to sign up to for being part of Extinction Rebellion. We're a social movement and we've got free demands, right? But there, first of all, in terms of worldview, I mean, Mothier here is part of the vision sensing group.
Okay.
And I think we've got people from media messaging team. It's a crucial piece that we have to bring through a vision. It's also part of emergency mode messaging, which we're working with. Tell people there's emergency, share a vision. So there needs to be a view, a vision here of, so we need to, you know, you've just talked like that and we're all going, whoa, we need to land it as a movement to communicate to people something more than where we're at, I guess, is the way I heard the worldview, the sort of unification of science and love if it would be another way of talking about esoteric religion from my perspective. So the second bit is the way you're talking, I'm guessing you've come across sort of spiral dynamics, Ken Wilber's work, Theory of Everything, teal consciousness, but you're talking to it anyway if you haven't, but and you'll want to read it if you haven't. But with teal organising is part of what we're trying to do. So you have a self-organising system. You're really trying to decentralise how you organise. So it's Frederick Laloux's work, the sort of Frederick Laloux supporting is now the reinventing organisations type piece. So how you actually organise, and like our self-organising system, as people here from that team, it's got a way to go, but we're trying to bring that in terms of how we actually work together as an organism. And part of the teal consciousness, what you were bringing through there is the ideas that, you know, they have these different colours. The orange layer is scientific, the green meme stuck in its narcissism and judgment, but the progressive left, you know, the blue conservatism that believes in conservative values that have got things in them that are worthy, and you know, and so there's something in teal that's about unifying these things and not having them be in a battle with each other. So that's part of what is in, I believe, in XR, and it makes some people cross with us, but we often say we're not trying to have this fight between the left. We're trying to say we've got to tackle this thing.
Well, that's really a low-hanging fruit, because I mean the social movement that's really going to be worldwide, it's not going to be left or right or conservative versus progressive, or capitalist versus socialist. It's non-starter. We're going to start abandon capitalism and get rid of it, or kind of like even when you're Marxist thinkers like Zizek expresses admiration for capitalism. Reform basically instead of like trying to go one extreme versus the other. Now this is such easy low-hanging fruit to really boost your movement, and it's such a simple thing. Basically, that what you believe in, if you believe in this esoteric dimension to politics and the world and world history, it's a simple idea called the golden mean. It's universal. The golden mean, it's associated with ancient Greece, but it's Taoist, it's Jewish, it's Muslim, it's universal. Simply put, basically there are polar opposites, male and female, good and evil. You need both. And it's not basically going to one extreme versus the other, going complete totalitarian or going complete laissez-faire. So dominant ideologies of today is basically Ayn Rand and complete laissez-faire neoliberalism and the other than selfish genes Darwinism. It's such a simple thing to say that basically this movement basically just seeks to restore the mean. And basically what's happened is that the extremists have taken over, the Ayn Rand followers have taken over. But it's such a simple thing historically. Ayn Rand basically came from Russia, and her philosophy of absolute selfishness as a virtue, which is very influential in America. You talk about the Senate, Donald Trump, massive Ayn Rand fan. Basically, it was a complete and opposite reaction to the totalitarianism of Stalin, a complete opposite reaction. Von Hayek, the godfather of neoliberalism, he came from Austria, and his kind of complete laissez-faire, capitalism was a complete reaction against Hitler. It's such an easy thing to say. Look, these extremists have reacted to these other extremists, and what we simply seek to do is just restore the balance in the force. And then you can do it with left-wing, right-wing. This is not a left-wing movement, this is not a right-wing movement. You say, what does left-wing mean? In a sense, we're all left-wing, in terms of French Revolution, here is the king, people sat to his left were the reformers, the capitalists. Funny, the capitalists back at that time were the left-wing, were the revolutionaries. The right-wing were the kings and the aristocrats and the, kind of the clergy. Unless you want to go back to kings, aristocracy and clergy, we are all left-wing. See, so it's such an easy thing to say, the conservative factions of this world, the progressive factions of this world, were basically saying the same thing. And historically, you can go back to the roots of America and go back to, the kind of like the restoration of Atlantis, the new Atlantis, Francis Bacon, back to Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and the ideas of the Statue of Liberty, and the kind of like Freemason, Rosicrucian-led revolutions. So a revolution, there's a power to reawakening an interpretation of the past. Now, many political movements conjure up a fictional past, a mythic past. These were the fundamentals, this is what was lost, and this is our interpretation of what the fundamentals are, and it's a really powerful way of communicating things. But if you actually communicate the real fundamentals, the real history behind America, the Enlightenment, Islam, etc., that basically supports revolutionary, progressive unification aims. That's a very, very powerful narrative. It's in terms of reconciling polar opposites. That it's such an easy thing to basically communicate this idea that we believe in this thing called the golden mean, and it's universal. You can quote, like passages from the Quran, you can quote, Taoism, etc., and you can actually communicate it in a very powerful way. And in terms of revolution, people are scared shitless of this kind of like a socialist revolution, kind of bring back Clause 4 and I'm going to nationalise everything. It's not going to happen. It's a non-starter. Okay. I know it's going to offend some socialists, I know, but I'm saying basically even if you're rabid Marxists have become, in China, the best managers of capitalism in the world, then to have this revolution, kind of like, we're going to nationalise everything, go back to, kind of like Stalin, Lenin and stuff, it's not going to work. And the easy way to do it, which is like what you're doing and you're getting flack for, is basically communicate this golden mean idea.
So, I was with the Rebel Wisdom people yesterday, and one of the things they're talking about is the authoritarian left. When the left is so forceful and it's strong, it can be very polarised.
Yeah.
And one of my favourite videos is Milton Friedman talking about capitalism, where he's going on about how wonderful it is, the innovation, what the markets can bring. And right at the end, he shares his vision of neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism. He says, because the markets will make sure everything's shared out, there will be no concentration of power, and therefore that no harm will be done. And why I love that video is because I share the vision of Milton Friedman, that I want there to be no concentration of power and therefore no harm done. It's just that the mechanism that he thought would achieve that hasn't achieved it. So that's the kind of conversation now. Like, I don't know whether, how I, believe strongly that the operating system of humanity is flawed, and that we could have an the way that Extinction Rebellion could move is to have international demands focused on saying the operating system has got severe bugs in it and we've got to reprogram it, or however we want to say it. But that's a conversation that you have that's not ideological. It's looking honestly at what the issues are. I wanted to go back to this point about why esoteric religion might support revolutionary movements, because I think what I'm hearing you saying is the idea of the vision that's within esoteric religions coming through. That's what helped these other movements. But I also wondered, if I've got that right, correctly, if I've got it wrong, correct me, but I also wondered if those movements had people within them that felt that they were in a dialogue with the consciousness, and therefore getting, and this is where we all sound mad, right? So this is Gail, this is not Extinction Rebellion. I did say to Ian McGilchrist yesterday, I sort of did the girly groupie bit on him, and I feel, from my perspective, I think Extinction Rebellion's an experiment in teleology. It's a sort of, but there are people who've set up Extinction Rebellion magic. There are people who, before our movement, massive rebellion periods happen, people go and work with South American traditions, dispatchos into the River Thames has happened a couple of times, a lot of prayer and so on. So have people actually been in a dialogue? And I will tell you a story that everybody else has heard in a minute about a dialogue piece, but if you just...
Well, I mean, the meaning of natural magic was this idea that somehow what's in the mind you manifest in physical reality. Okay, that sounds very mundane, doesn't it? And it ties in with ideas of law of attraction and kind of new thought in America. It's a simple idea. Basically, the magus, or the white magician, basically has a thought. It could be a kind of a piece of architecture, a cathedral, or whatever. It could be a new society. Basically, through magic, through concentrating on that thought manifests in reality. Okay, so on a mundane level, to do anything, to get an ice cream, I need to keep that thought in my mind. I walk to the shop, I go to the bank, and if I stop thinking about it, I failed, I didn't get the ice cream, But on a more kind of like mystical level, the idea of magic is basically, that you have a thought in your mind that's not selfish, that's not law of attraction. I'm going to visualize checks coming through the post, and I get my Mercedes-Benz, and I get lots of money come, my book deal and stuff, and lots of kind of like attractive members of the opposite sex, etc. is something slightly different. Basically, you have a thought in your mind, and it's a transcendent thought that you've derived from either your mystical experiences or through your intuition or through your kind of your heart, I suppose, your heart's intent. By keeping that thought in your mind, there is a kind of magical as in, you know, capital M. Things happen around that thought, and they manifest. Uncanny things happen. Well, if there's a destiny wave function, it means that if your will is aligned to the universe, then of course the universe will conspire to make things happen. Crazy synchronicities I've had in my life. Just crazy synchronicities. I mean, I can tell you these crazy synchronicities, and okay, you might say I'm lying. You've made most of these I can prove. Then you just know the universe is set up. When I talk about you know, destiny wave function, I see it in my life. And the coordination of these events is not random, it's basically set up. But if you align your will to the universe, whether it's to change the world or start a world revolution, basically the universe will conspire to make it happen. Now the skeptic would say, oh, these people magical, okay, truths are self-fulfilling, they just believed it and they were very fervent and very motivated, then that's all there is to it. But no, there's something magical, there is a hand of providence, there is a force behind it. And that's the reason why people who believe in the mystery really do believe in it and live it. Basically, things will happen around them to make it happen. And even the impossible dream, the impossible goal of actually creating revolutionary movements that succeed in toppling existing governments or sort of reforming governments and, you know, kind of like beneficially changing behaviors and stuff in a kind of peaceful evolutionary way. So it doesn't have to be revolution or nothing. Okay, basically the universe conspires to make it happen. And that's the reason why it's not just academic, oh, these people have magical thinking, therefore they are enthusiastic and they're more motivated. Basically there is something mysterious, and there is a physical explanation now through these new currents in physics. And once you have that, okay, once you marry these ideas from physics to ideas of mysticism and magic, that's a very potent combination. Then you realise, oh yes, synchronicities, and of course, physics allows it. You know, like synchronicities, Carl Gustav Jung collaborated with Wolfgang Pauli, you know, quantum physicist, I mean, Nobel Prize winning quantum physicist. So it's always been there, but I'm saying in the past 5-10 years, it's really become, new results have come in to basically really ram home the point. That when people say, oh, using quantum mechanics and science to justify your woo, your kind of like your cranky New Age beliefs, these were the beliefs of the founders of quantum mechanics and the founders of science. So it's full circle. Science has basically returned to the mystery. But if you can actually link this kind of interpretation of science with political philosophy, with social movements, with etc., kind of like you know, on a more kind of personal level, then that is really the kind of paradigm shift that people have been waiting for. And the beauty of this way of looking at things is that to a Muslim it will look like the true Islam. To a Christian, it will look like the original unadulterated truths of the Bible. To a kind of militant atheist, it will look like the original ideas of the Enlightenment and Renaissance. So that's this kind of quality of reconciling dualities, kind of like unifying different points of views, but also that's this kind of chameleon quality of basically, you know, is the grand unification has a kind of, you know, chimera kind of quality, which is what you need for a kind of real world, universal message and movement that is not postmodern. I don't want to sound like Jordan Peterson here, okay? It's kind of funny. I mean, really. I mean, he says some interesting things about clinical psychology, his background. But on a plus side, he does. You know, he's into Joseph Campbell. He's into psychedelic drugs. He's into looking for some objective truth in mythology. So there's some common ground there. But seriously, this guy is the person who would tell Greta Thunberg, you know, you snotty-nosed little kid, you know, you shouldn't be protesting, go tidy your bedroom, you should be going to school. I mean, he's a guy who would say to, you know, kids in America protesting gun violence, you little kids, what do you know about gun violence? What do you know about not wanting your friends and yourself to be shot dead in school? What do you know? I mean, you know, go to school and, you know, don't protest. So there's aspects of his message which is totally antithetical to what you guys are doing. You know. I've
been told, I think Stephen said this is teal from the neck upwards, didn't you? You know, the heart bit's missing.
But at the same time, at the same time, there are aspects of you know, all these different thinkers which would violently agree with, like Peterson, Sam Harris, all these different thinkers. But you can communicate this message in such a way that you can actually it can resonate even with their followers. So it's powerful.
Yeah. Awesome. So I will tell this story.
Okay, great.
Everybody else in the room's probably heard, right? So I've been trying to start mass civil disobedience since 2010.
Okay.
So part of my journey was watching videos like yours, and got stuck in myself with some personal issues, and got stuck not finding the team, not understanding what exactly had to happen, not having the right information. So I went and did a big psychedelic journey with the iboga with a flood dose, which was a brain rewiring around anxiety and happiness and stuff, and then with the ayahuasca. Cambo and 3 ayahuascas. I mean, it was a full-on, full-on 2 weeks. Two ibogas, a Cambo, 3 ayahuascas. I mean, I was not leaving any stone unturned really. But because I'd listened to Terence McKenna, talking about the codes in the higher consciousness. I thought, I'm missing the codes for social change. Right? What are the codes? There must be some codes in the higher consciousness. What am I missing? Where is the team? Who should I work with? What guides and allies are there? Blah, blah, blah. So that was this is my personal journey genesis story, right? I mean, XR is far bigger than this, but this is part of it for me. But and then I came back and tried to start a mass tax disobedience, and didn't really work. Well, it didn't work, but through that I met Roger, who's out of the room. He said he's got a load of data for me to share. And we have a 4-hour meeting in London in 2016, where he's telling me all, because he's been doing a PhD in how things change, about momentum. Well, actually, it was less about. We brought in momentum-driven organising afterwards, but it was a lot to do with conditional commitment and various theories. You'll see that Roger's written up. This is an uprising type stuff. Anyway, a 4-hour download of really cool information, and I was so happy about it. And obviously, we're going to start working together and blah blah blah. And I said to him, Roger, that's amazing. That's exactly what I needed to know. And the moment is, he taps the notepad and goes, well, basically, Gail, what I've just given you here are the codes for social change. So he uses the phrase of the prayer, which was, and what seemed really significant to me about that was, I don't think I would have recognised that the prayer had been answered somehow, that it was like the universe is going by the way. And you can say that's coincidence, we can, you know, of course, and but there have been other moments for myself that have been a request. As you said, it has to be in service to something bigger than yourself. It's not asking. So another one, which wasn't a psychedelic, it was in the way I work, is you put herbs on the fire and you'll say them. And the reason I've got Wai in today, and I love his stuff, is because, you know, as somebody who's got a PhD in molecular biophysics and likes to not be, you know, I sit in a community where everybody's into homeopathy and this, that and the other, and it's not my thing. I'm much more into the sort of rational. I don't like just woo. Wafty, whatever. So looking for a way to kind of understand experiences is strong for me, and I think there's so that, you know, putting a prayer on a fire that gets answered 2 days later is the synchronicities. I mean, also there was a lot of praying before each of the rebellions, and, you know, again, people worked bloody hard. You know, we're talking about Jamie and I this morning about the person at 4 in the morning who was emptying the piss buckets on Marble Arch, right? There are people who were working really, really hard to have this thing go as well as possible, but I just find it incredible that each of our big launch, our Rebellion Period 1, Rebellion Period 2, as far as I know, and I'm not saying everybody had an amazing time all the time, right? But the prayers for protection, for this thing to succeed, for it to go well, there were a lot of, I don't know, I just find it like there's something here that feels held to me. And quite often somebody comes in the room, might be you, you know, you're new today, you just think you're here for a reason, right? What's your role? And then Diara stands on the pink boat from the Amazon, from the Brazilian Amazon, and says, you know, if you're here at this time, you're here for a reason. In the understanding of indigenous people from her tribe, you know, you've come here for a reason. So what's your reason? And people arrive. So these synchronicities.
Well, I mean, I talk about prophecies on a theoretical level and prophecies behind social movements on a theoretical level. I totally believe it, and I think as things get more dire on this planet, you know, Okay, there's one thing about using mythic archetypes and prophetic archetypes to start social movements or to encourage social movements, and it's very powerful to say, you know, because people know the mythic archetype from Star Wars. Okay, you know, Star Wars, and the link between mythology and Star Wars is not overstated, because, you know, the guy who did the monomyth, Joseph Campbell, actually said, yeah, that these myths have to be recommunicated every generation, and George Lucas has done it. And then George Lucas says, yeah, I was trying to communicate the monomyth, and he actually says, you know, Joseph Campbell was my mentor. So the monomyth is really out there.
Is this the hero's journey?
The hero's journey, yeah, exactly. And there's a very powerful combination to say, basically, the mythic archetype that's happened, the hero of 1,000 faces has appeared all across the planet, okay, in the past. That's Joseph Campbell's idea. And to say that, he quotes the philosopher Sallustius, the Roman philosopher, that myths are things which never happen but always are. Now, these mythic archetypes, they manifest on the planet, locally, in different parts of the world, South America, China, etc., and all kind of like religious figures and your mythic heroes. The simple connection with mythology and prophecy is simply that the mythic archetype will manifest on a planetary scale. And that's what all the prophecies in the Muslim world, in the Christian traditions, Jewish traditions, Zoroastrian, that's what they're about. The mythic archetypes manifest on a planetary scale. The extra, in terms of, you know...
Is that the sort of Christ consciousness, for example, in Christianity, that the coming of the Christ the second time?
Well, Book of Revelation is quite explicit. It talks about the destroyers of the earth. That's quite explicit. Talks about the coming, when a great thing happens. They shall hunger no more, they shall thirst no more, the sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. What we're facing is scorching heat, so the happy ending is basically we'll somehow survive it. It talks about the physical and spiritual transformation of the planet, but these prophecies are quite explicit. In the past, these prophecies have been used, like, it's sort of like the mythic archetype, it's sort of like the apocalypse archetype, and these have really propelled revolutionary movements forwards. Now, the real, you know, dynamite fuel that can really cause this thing to happen in a very short scale of time is to use real prophecies. Okay, some people will say you're playing with fire. That really is a kind of like a... But it takes things to another level. But when you understand that basically even your scientists are saying, you know, artificial intelligence, the biggest event in human history, that's what prophecy is about, the big happening. And if this thing happens in a way that where the planet completely corresponds with these prophecies in Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, a time when drought, famine, disease will sweep the world, Buddhism, etc., all these kind of different prophecies. Basically, we match up these prophecies to the conditions of the planet today. That's a very, very kind of powerful message. And if you really want to start a world revolution, you've got to understand that a lot of this world is very religious. You're going to keep it to atheists and secular humanists and, you know, middle class people. If you really want to communicate this revolution to the wider world, you're going to have to communicate it in religious terms as well as scientific terms. And I'm saying that's a very potent combination.
And so part of what I mean, some of the things that have happened as part of Extinction Rebellion have happened by design, but some of them have become apparent. So one of them is that grief is a really necessary emotion, that the green movement has been trying to talk about climate change and not worry people about it. So we've moved into the let's worry people about it. It's called emergency mode messaging. Let's talk about it. It's a well-known messaging tool that's used to get people to stop smoking or wear a seatbelt. You know, there's a really big problem. There's something we can do about it. Why don't you act according to these? Right. So that's one thing. But the other bit is that by facing what's happening in these times, it elicits a feeling of whether it's panic, grief, trauma. Daniel Pinchbeck's talked about in a book, I think, that maybe this shift in human consciousness, which is into so-called teal and the spiral dynamics, comes from, not everybody has to make the shift, right? It's just others, but it comes from a collective trauma. And I think, I guess the way I see it is the more we can feel it now, the more we can feel it now, rather than like when for us in the Western democracies it's really hitting us. The more we can feel it now, the more we can make the shift, right? So Actually, something's just landed in my brain, actually, which hopefully I'll get to say. But so first of all, we've been really inviting people to grieve and to feel how this feels. And so many people have said to us, what a relief that I was feeling so wound up, and the IPCC report and so on. So that's in there, and there's something, as we know by the grieving process, it's an emotional process, but it's trauma. It's like when you face a death, or your own potential death, or your death was, it opens up, it transforms how you think about your life, and there's a collective way of doing that. But what just connected with me actually was that I think the biggest barrier we've got in our movement right now is, because it's led from the UK and then other countries, is the inability to really feel the grief and pain and the reality of how other countries have suffered already. We tend to be able to, some of us, connect to bits of nature, and that's fine, whatever way is going to speak to your heart, you know, although there is something telling us something when you can feel more about a walrus than a person in Bangladesh. And there's something, we have to feel it as soon as possible because time's running out, you know. So there's something about that, seeing what's happening to the rest of our family.
Okay, you know. I'll say something. I think relevant is that grief is important, and when you talk about your classic revolutionary agitation, you want to basically agitate people. You want to make people even angry and upset, and you want to awaken emotions. But I'd say the really important thing about dealing with these emotions of agitation, grief, all these negative emotions, you have to provide the positive.
Yes.
Now personally, when I a terribly addictive personality, and I had massive problems giving up smoking, but I finally cracked it. And basically, what is this? It's basically I basically beat myself so badly up. You know, smoking's bad, lung cancer, it's going to be bad, so I'm going to quit smoking. But then I depressed myself so much, getting depressed about smoking, I wanted cigarettes. Now, how I did it in the end was basically I made a list. I made a list of all the good things about not smoking: more money, clean lungs, better jogging, not smelly clothes, all this kind of thing. I had to walk to the all-night garage 3 o'clock in the morning. And I made a positive list, and that really, it worked for me, basically. It worked. And I'm saying, in terms of revolutionary movements, basically, this is a simple thing, and it's called, you need a utopian vision. And you must have it. If you don't have it, it's very hard to motivate the troops over a long time span across difficulty, across a kind of like... So grief is important, as is all these other emotions, but you must have that kind of driving force that what we're doing is going to lead to something far better. It's not sacrifice yourselves, it's going to be hard, it's going to be lots of work, it's going to be horrible. And what we get out of it is that situation, we're going to be horribly dead and extinct and stuff, but by making all this sacrifice and pain and suffering and going to prison and stuff, we're going to make things slightly less horrible. Do you know what I'm saying? It's got to be better than that. It's got to be utopian, and it's got to be plausible. It's got to be convincing. It's got to be exciting. Now, the Venus Project was horrible, and Zeitgeist movement. Okay, I'll say it. I think it's completely stupid. Okay, I'll say it. And they kind of allied themselves to this really dumb idea called resource-based economy. Basically, you know, we're going to save the planet. Give us all your resource, all your different countries. Give us all your resources, mineral, physical resources. Give us all your resource, and then we'll allocate it out to you, and we'll save the planet that way. Okay, they pinned the entire movement on one single kind of like strategy, really. Okay, and you know, we'll create this kind of society without money, but give us all your money so we can create it. Okay, kind of fell apart. Okay, but what they had, which was good, okay, was they had a vision of the future. It was an artistic rendition. It was really impressive. It basically drew it out. Okay, people could see it. Okay, the artist's impressions were very impressive, and it really excited people. That the reality was something different. It was Jack Fresco in his backyard. So how far have you got with your Venus project? And it's basically, and one of the buildings was like an outdoor toilet, outdoor toilets. And they opened the door and it jammed. It's like, and that's, you know, but give us all your money and we'll create this, you know, these kind of city futurescapes of, you know, these kind of like elevating trains and stuff. Now what they had was this kind of utopian vision, but in order to create a real social movement worldwide, you need a believable social vision and a social kind of utopian vision for the future that incorporates, you know, kind of like justice, you know, kind of like equality, not equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity. Sorry, take on. I mean, but you need basically this idea of, you know, universal justice. So finally, we're going to, you know, sort out the corruption in society, in politics. But also I think there is a kind of like a kind of ecological vision, organic farming, biodynamic farming, kind of clean water, clean, restoring the planet and stuff like that, eco. But I think there's also a technological side to things, which is low-hanging fruit again, to really excite people. And it's happening. I mean, you know, just this year, well, in China anyway, I think a dozen provinces, finally, this year, renewable energy has achieved parity with coal. And wind and solar will get cheaper and cheaper. I'm saying that's a technological revolution, but it's many, many facets to this kind of... but that's one example of this kind of utopian vision through technology, reconciled with eco. Yeah. It means, yes, 5G is amazing, but if people want to opt out and basically go to 5G-free areas, then that's fine. So you can basically, there's a huge movement out there, which is basically utopian. It's technological. There's a huge movement out there, which is ecological. And somehow you must excite both these worlds.
It might be worth sharing a couple of other things that relate to that. I'm totally with you about the vision, and I don't think we share that strongly enough, and it's part of the emergency mode messaging is share the vision. I suppose a blockage I have around it personally is that we do know that A, we're already in a catastrophe, and B, it's going to get worse, you know. Yeah. I mean, and so our whole sort of number one thing is tell the truth. So it's kind of like saying it's all going to be cool. It feels not okay. But one of the ways, but we have to find a way to say that. That's the piece of work that really is urgent, in my opinion. Looking at Mothia there, no pressure. Yeah.
But sorry, just interrupt you. Yeah, definitely there needs to be a social vision, because I think one of the things in the world today is alienation from nature and from each other. And I think that's one of the things you need to bring back.
And nature everywhere. You know, you see these odd buildings where they're green, and you think, how are we going to get all the carbon out of the atmosphere? We're either going to have these stupid sucking machines that are not going to happen because they're not ecological anyway. But just making everywhere green, I mean, it's just is part of that vision. Yeah. I
mean, for all its faults, I mean, organised religion for all its faults. I worked in the church for 10 years. I mean, it wasn't a proper church. It was St James Piccadilly. It was a kind of like pirate ship in the Church of England. I worked there for 10 years. Sort of New Age stuff, comparative, you know, reconciling religions and stuff. So it's very progressive. But okay, the fall of religion in the West, basically, okay, it's good. I mean, no more this kind of nonsense, virgin birth was kind of funny stuff. I mean, but organised religion gave people a sense of community. It gave people a kind of like a focus, and basically, you know, working there, singing hymns. It's great singing hymns together. The simple act of singing together is spiritual. Mm-hmm. Okay, but apart from when they put the very cheesy modern lyrics to old hymns, horrible. Okay, I mean, you know, okay. But that's one thing which is missing from modern society, which you need a kind of like something like that.
I think somebody said, well, actually, I met somebody called Sanderson yesterday who's been doing modern day atheist church services. Or something.
Oh yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, I know. Yeah, that was a joke that became serious. Okay, but you know, religion was something serious that became a joke. So maybe the two can meet somewhere. But I think you know, in terms of like new forms of organisation, it doesn't have to be, oh, you know, like this is a religion, this is the kind of orthodoxy, this is the catechism, believe or we're out. So if you have a kind of like this worldview, then it's really a kind of really easygoing, inclusive thing that can incorporate different races and different religions. Now you or we are very lucky to be in London. If you want to kind of testbed a new universal world idea or narrative or Weltanschauung, you know, worldview, you're in London. All races, all religions are in this city. You don't have to fly out, send missionaries all over the place. Everyone is here. Mm-hmm. So if you want to try out this universal message, basically, you know, if you're successful, if basically, I mean, I know you've been criticised for being purely middle class, okay, but you're not, because I kind of like know these movements, but they'll kind of pigeonhole you in that way. Mm. But really, if you can, in the months and years to come, if you can really get young Muslims, young alt-right people even, you know, young Jordan Peterson followers, you know what I'm saying? That's the acid test, isn't it? You get mainstream people, even conservatives, even capitalists, kind of city workers in the city.
We've got one of those already.
Yeah, exactly. If you can do it, London is a microcosm of the entire world. It's a mystical microcosm's macrocosm. So basically, this is the perfect place to start a world movement.
Thank you. And the singing piece as well is, because don't they now know that there's neurons in your heart, neurons in your gut, when people talk about their gut instinct and the heart, and that the singing, you know, it opens up the heart space. I think is part of the thing. It's just for us is finding ways to bring this in that isn't, you know, too on the word, and it just becomes that, you know, the crust is doing that thing. I wanted to mention another piece that I've noticed, or that's been named, is, you know, because we have this focus on being willing to be arrested, right?
Okay.
And it's sometimes named as you must get arrested, not must, but, and so it sounds a bit mechanical, but we'd sort of said this time in a Sunday Times article, if we had 10,000 people on the streets, 1,000 arrests, we thought we'd blow something, and that's what we got, right? And we did blow something. I mean, not like in quotes won yet, but one of the things I've kind of, just a few months ago, when we started doing the talk, heading for extinction, and you'd sort of say to people, you give them all this information and about social movements and about how civil disobedience is part of it, and you set up a dilemma action, it's called. This is the stuff Roger talked about to me first of all. A dilemma action means, you know, you go and do something and either then let you get away with it, in which case happy days, or they arrest you for it, in which case the story happy days. So you set these things up. So being willing to get arrested is a thing. So then the piece there is like, you gave the talk about why arrests were going to be part of this movement, and at first people would look around, you'd say, so you have these literal who's willing to get arrested in this, you know, and obviously make the point that this is not for everybody. It's going to be a different experience potentially if you're black, if you've got mental health issues, not for everybody. You can be in support of the movement, not to stop anybody doing anything either, but are you willing to get arrested, tick your box type of thing, and people would be like, you know, like, what? Do you mean? So now, that has changed, right?
Okay.
I mean, there's seems to be up to potentially 500,000 people in the UK willing to do that from some data we've had.
Okay.
Which is a big deal, because there's this. I don't know if you know this data from Erica Chenoweth, that if you have 3.4% of the population. But what I was going to say is there's something of the system in us, right? It's in us. And then we know that if you want to do a transition, there's an initiation. So one of the things we've sort of recognised is it can be the arrest process can be, or the supporting of that process can be an initiatory moment.
You've always found us in social movements in the past that basically the shared hardship bonds the movement together. Well, at the same time, I wouldn't base a movement on one tactic. I'd have many tactics and expand the tactics, because you can absolutely guarantee basically there's tactics and there's counter tactics. So basically, I saw the Banksy, despair has ended, tactics has begun. So it's counter tactics. You can bet. I mean, I know for a fact, and it is the case that Special Branch MI5 are thinking, what are they going to do next, and how can we respond? Okay, and you're being infiltrated now. I mean,
well, actually, in all honesty, there is an active conversation with the police. That's been a strategic decision. And in that way, making the assumption that infiltration will happen, and that
exactly.
You know, we just have to handle that.
It's important basically for the movement to be transparent, whereby you get to a situation where your Special Branch and MI5 officers will come to believe that, gosh, these guys are doing really is for me and my children as well. And when you start doing that, that's when your movement starts to succeed, when you actually get judiciary sympathising with you, members of the establishment, maybe not all the establishment, but often be some of the members and their sons and daughters. That's when a movement will succeed. But in terms of counter tactics and in terms of strategy, you've got to have an array of strategies and tactics. But ultimately, you have to gain power. I don't think through purely protest movements you can. I mean, in the questions you sent me, you talked about rebooting the operating system, changing legislation, and also reforming the financial system. If you want to do that, you have to gain power. So I think protest is really important, because it's marches, rallies, canvassing, but as a part of a repertoire of many tactics that needs to be a spread of, and different places will. The different tactics will apply to different places. So I think instead of actually homing on one tactic, which is very effective, but you can bet your dollar that basically there are people thinking, how can we thwart future?
Sure.
And it's going to be, it's going to be the army. It's going to be mass camps. It's going to be new laws of arrest. And police commissioners asked for new laws to deal with these kind of events already. That's in the Evening Standard I read. So I think it's an ongoing thing. When you said in your message dialogue about tactics and strategy, I think it's a really evolving thing. I can't really advise you, because you know far more about these kind of things than I do. But I think in terms of in the long run, it's great because you've got loads more a bigger following. You get media attention, but really the critical thing is to evolve and grow.
Yeah. Thank you. So, so I think we'll start to wrap up. I just wondered if there was anything else that you felt.
Oh, it's fine. I could talk for hours.
And hours. I recognise that.
You know, really, I give talks and basically, really, I start talking, and 3.5 hours later, people have sat there. Look, no, I'm serious. And basically, the people that come back. So I can talk for hours and hours. But but I mean, obviously, it's a hot room, and concentration spans are limited. But yeah, really, great work, you guys. I mean, I've got to say that basically, in terms of synchronicities and destiny wave functions, I think all these movements around the world, they'll find each other, they'll link up, and basically it's find that common ground, and it's not left or right, conservative or progressive. So I think that's gonna happen.
Should we just thank Wai?
Yeah, man.